Hello Universe and random YouTube viewers, and welcome to another video with me, Sutekh of Mars. And as dictated by the title, today we will be reviewing the first serial of Season 22 as broadcast in 1985, Attack of the Cybermen. So allow me to begin by saying this story introduced me to my favourite Doctor, my favourite incarnation, Colin Baker, and holds an exceedingly special place in my heart, incomprehensibly coded. I love it so very much. And one could say correspondingly that my opinions may be somewhat biased, but anyhow, we'll get into the review part later. First, we'll take a look at the synopsis, and rather than merely articulating something from my recollection, we're just going to read the synopsis on the DVD. So, the TARDIS is lured to Earth, London, 1985, by an alien distress signal. Investigating, the Doctor and Perry stumble upon an attempted bank robbery staged through the London sewers by a familiar foe, ex-Dalek agent Lytton, but who is he working for this time? For they soon discover there is something far nastier lurking in the sewers, the Cybermen. Why do the Silver Giants in the time machine? What is their devastating plan of attack? And what does it have to do with the catastrophic events that happened long ago in the Doctor's past, aka the Cybermen's attempted invasion on Earth as seen in the 1966 serial The 10th Planet. So that's the brief synopsis as displayed on the DVD. And can I just articulate my fondness for the DVD company? But anyway, coming into the review, on my previous review, The Twin Dilemma, there was an abundance of negative comments for obvious reasons. So on this review, I've tried to separate the positive and negative attributes of this story to give you far more of a appropriate argument if you haven't previously perceived the story. So first of all, as always, Colin's performance is irrefutably resplendent. It's always incomprehensibly brilliant, and I think in this story, proceeding the atrocity of the Twin Dilemma, he seemed really settled in the role, he seemed like the Doctor, and I think this is probably the story, perhaps surpassed by Ultimate Foe, but nonetheless, Colin has one of his best performances in this series. And yes, he's just as flamboyant and conspicuous as ever, and just marvellous. Valiant, particularly, and I'll go on to the specific links later when he displays his Valiant. Of course, as I've previously said, Lytton returns, the cantankerous Lytton, and he produces a marvellous performance, very narcissistic, supercilious, which of course we all know I'm exceedingly fond of. And I think Lytton is somewhat of an underrated villain. He only had 2 appearances, obviously previously appearing in Resurrection of the Daleks, but I think he is a marvellous villain who turns protagonist in the end, and we'll go on to that later. So Lytton, glorious as always. The Cybermen, again, in the story, I feel as though they are exceedingly menacious, barbarous, and computing as ever, and are really presented rather well, despite the prevalent criticism of their voices. And specifically, there's a new type of Cyberman featured in the story called this. Well, it's referred to as 2 different things. Some say it's a Cyber Scout, and some say it's a Stealth Cyberman, as in the figures. You can't see it behind me, but on the figure packaging it was referred to as the Stealth Cyberman. And I like this idea of variation in the Cybermen ranking, because obviously you have the Cyber Lieutenant, you have the General Scout, and you have the Cyber Controller, because it really sort of produces sort of concept of an army, a cyber army. So yes, menacious, barbarous, pugnacious, and just pure evil. Favourite villain, and they are shown wonderfully here. And obviously the Cybermen are the perpetrators of numerous transgressions, referring to morbid and really grotesque scenes, and we'll go on to that later. And I would say now, I love those scenes immeasurably. Supporting cast, they're okay, I suppose. Relatively convincing. Yeah, there's not a lot to say about the supporting cast. I do like the chemistry between Perry and the 6th Doctor in the series. I think it's wonderful, as always. And, apart from Ace and the 7th Doctor, it's perhaps surpasses Jamie and the Second Doctor as one of my favourite companion-doctor relationships. But yes, the supporting cast are tolerable, not particularly special. Synopsis-wise, from my perception, it's enthralling. I think it's intelligently written, and it seems like the sort of story I'd write. Relatively complex, and utilises humorous scenes at times, but sparingly throughout the piece so it doesn't become vexatious. And like I said, there are a lot of morbid and grotesque scenes which I really love, and they're wonderfully written, incredulously morbid and that, and really stimulate emotionally. So that's that for the synopsis. There is a lot of controversy, however, that surrounds this story. And at the time, in 1985, and in the previous year, Doctor Who was being prevalently criticised for integrating far too many pugnacious attributes, a lot of grotesque and morbid scenes that were presumably perceived as unsuitable for children, the show being primarily a children's programme. And this story certainly corresponds with that view. There are a lot of morbid and grotesque scenes. For example, there's a scene where Lytton is being interrogated in cyber control by the cyber controller, and the controller gesticulates towards his cyber lieutenants. They grab his hands and crush them until they're incarcerated in blood. And yeah, it sounds horrible, and indeed it rather is. Nonetheless, I love it. I think it's brilliant, and I think it's important to integrate some really powerful and grotesque scenes into Doctor Who to really frighten the children. Perhaps not traumatised, but frightened. And there are numerous other scenes scattered throughout the serial that once again are considered as terribly demonic and occasionally over the top and rather horrific. But that's that for the controversy, and that completes all the positives. I mean, I could go on infinitely about the story, articulating so many things I love it for, but those are the primary attributes. Negative-wise, obviously I don't believe they don't appear until episode 2, or part 2, but the Cryons in this story, as depicted here, honestly, I think they squandered the story somewhat. They're not a bad concept, creatures that can't exist in temperatures above 0 degrees. Nonetheless, the design of the Cryons, I mean, I'm aware the budget was relatively low. Nonetheless, they could have created far more convincing prosthetics for the Cryons. They look quite poor, honestly. And their voices are minimally vexatious, and they could have been executed better. Nonetheless, they're not a bad protagonist. They're interesting. Let's see, against the Cybermen. So yes, tolerable, but could have been executed better. And despite my fondness for the story and how I contemplate it to be so brilliantly written, intelligently written, it can become a little convoluted at times, unnecessarily. I say at times, I mean very infrequently, but I can surpass that. I mean, some people could say it's convoluted, but I don't think so. But yeah. And there's also, like I said, I've referenced the Barbara scenes on numerous occasions. There's a scene towards the end of the serial on the Cyber Control where the Cybermen are practically massacred by the Sixth Doctor. Now I wrote down here on this my preparation sheet that the conclusion seems rather rushed with that massacre. But on second contemplation, no, I don't think it's rushed. I think it's logical. Logical, not quite the right word. But yeah, I think it's an enjoyable scene, not too over the top. And Colin, now I don't utilise this word frequently, but he's rather badass. So yeah, I think the scene could be said to be rushed, and perhaps a better conclusion may have been more preferable. Nonetheless, it's relatively enjoyable. So yes, that really concludes the negative. I can't find much else wrong with this story. Like I said, I'm positively infatuated with it. But also contextually speaking, there is obviously an abundance of references to previous adventures scattered throughout this. I mean, there's There's Totter's Lane, there's references to Susan, Zodin, I think? Yeah, Zodin, Jamie, there's a lot of references to previous companions, and a lot of people criticise Season 22 for having far too many references to previous occasions, but yeah, it's always elating to see acknowledgement of the show's past, but I do understand what some people mean by the abundance, and you can see that really in this story. There are a lot of references. I'm just being called by someone on Skype. That's unfortunate, but let's conclude this before I answer that. So yes, overall, numerous positives, innumerable in my opinion. Brilliant story. I'd recommend it to anyone. Sutekh and Mars rating 8 out of 10. Definitely 8. So that concludes this review. Join me next time where we'll be reviewing the subsequent story, Vengeance on Varos. Until the next time, you two, I bid you adieu.